Story 1. White-collar office workers would get the day off. Blue-collar and service industry workers would still have to work, just like with every other holiday. Story 2. Honestly, probably nothing. The people most likely to get holidays off from work are already the most likely to vote. Story 3. Australia only has it on Saturday. Why don't they just do that? Story 4. It is already technically illegal for your employer to force you to work in a capacity that causes you to miss a federal election, except in emergency services. However, most employers will require you to use sick leave, personal leave, or your limited lunch break to vote. The effect of the law is that your employer cannot flatly refuse your request to vote, but they can require you to take time off outside working hours and apply various technicalities to support this. People working in right-to-work states can be fired for other reasons if they refuse, and many living paycheck to paycheck cannot afford the time off to vote. Story 5. Likely nothing. Many jobs do not give time off for national holidays. I doubt there is any desire for a federal law to ban employers from requiring people to work on that day either. This is all assuming that people care enough to go out and vote. If they did, lines would be too long in many locations. The better option is more early voting and mail-in voting. Make it easier to vote by spreading out the days when people have to vote and allow them to vote from the comfort of their own home. Story 6. My state, Washington, has universal mail-in ballots, which makes voting much easier. The only rush to vote occurs on Election Day at ballot drop-off locations for those who waited until then. If you vote early, you simply mail your ballot back using prepaid postage. Therefore, we do not need a holiday. We just need universal mail-in ballots. Story 7. Nothing if you are in a state that has vote by mail. Story 8. It would become another mandatory workday for hospitality and retail workers, like any other holiday. Story 9. I once read a statistic in a community health nursing textbook that 1 out of every 10 female registered voters is a nurse. Making Election Day a holiday would not make it easier for them or any other hospital staff to vote. Nor would it impact any other 24/7 workers such as firefighters, truck drivers, food service workers, and 911 operators. Story 10. The only way to encourage more voting is if you have to prove you voted to get the day off. Otherwise, people just do not understand. Story 11. Retail, customer service workers, and food service workers do not get to vote. When I was working retail and food service, I was not allowed to request national holidays off work. We worked Labor Day, Memorial Day, 4th of July, and Thanksgiving. Christmas was the only day we were closed. There are laws protecting time off to vote, but in many states that does not matter, especially in states that engage in active voter suppression by closing polling places or locating them where they are not easily accessible by public transit. Your Walmart supervisor is not going to give every employee the whole day off to take the once-an-hour bus to a polling place with a 3-hour line. I live in Oregon. We have vote by mail. The ballots arrive already stamped. They have your signature on file and check it against the one on the ballot. I get a text when the ballots are mailed out, another when they receive mine, and again when it is counted. It works great. I am also a fan of states that have early voting. The polling places open a week before Election Day or as scheduled. Story 12. Early voting and voting by mail should be expanded, which would make Election Day the day the votes are tallied. However, I do not think these measures would significantly increase voter turnout, which is currently about 66%. Some people simply do not care about voting. Eventually, secure online voting may increase voter participation, but that could be decades away. Story 13. More working-class people living paycheck to paycheck would be able to vote, which would not go well for politicians who depend primarily on wealthy donors to get reelected. Story 14. Most of the people who would get the day off are not those who have trouble making it to the polls, and those who do find it hard to make the time would still have to work or do whatever else keeps them from going now. But I will gladly take a day off for something that takes me about 15 minutes. Days off are awesome. Story 15. There might be more people voting, but most would stay home to enjoy a day off. Story 16. It would be a waste of time. Early voting is available. You can usually vote for weeks prior to Election Day. A day off would be nice, but people who want to vote will, and those who do not will find another reason not to, as is their right. Story 17. Technically, that would mean one less day for mail-in ballots since they have to be postmarked on or before Election Day. Story 18. I remember this same discussion 50 years ago as a young adult. Those in power do not want certain groups of people to vote, so they make it as difficult as possible for them while making it easy for other groups to get to the polls. That has been the case since I was a child in the 1960s, and it is not going to change anytime soon. Story 19. What would really solve your problem is not making people drive long distances to spend several hours waiting in line to vote. The fact that this happens in a modern democracy is absolutely shameful and definitely not normal. India is a larger democracy with a notoriously slow and malfunctioning bureaucracy, yet they have better average wait times than the United States. Story 20. We do not need a holiday. Just extend voting for a longer time period. Why not 14 days? Stop in to cast your vote. Cannot make it in? Mail in your ballot. Story 21. Mandatory vote by mail is the solution here. Everyone receives their ballot in the mail, has a couple of weeks to fill it out in the comfort of their own home, and mails it back. Oregon has been doing this for a long time and it works quite well. Story 22. If it is always on Tuesday, many people would take Monday off, have a 4-day weekend, go away, and possibly not vote. Story 23. More of the working class would vote. The wealthy will not allow that. Story 24. Blue-collar workers would be more likely to vote. Cannot have that happening. Story 25. Many people are forgetting about college students. Historically, this age group has abysmal participation in voting. Giving them a day off from classes will not only provide free time but also remind them they have the day off to take part in the voting process. Making it a holiday would have an impact on young liberal voters because it would encourage them to vote. Story 26. Not much. The only people required to have federal holidays off are federal employees, who are already legally guaranteed time to vote. Story 27. It could and should be done in my opinion. We closed practically everything for coronavirus disease for much longer than one day. Voting is a fundamental right and one that should not place a burden on citizens to claim that right. Story 28. I once worked for a company that observed Presidential Election Day as a work holiday. It had been negotiated years before as a trade-off for working an extra day in February since presidential elections are always on a leap year. Story 29. Considering how important it is, it should be like Christmas or New Year's. Story 30. That would be un-American. Companies cannot lose labor for the sake of some civic responsibility. That is not how you do America. Story 31. Why do people in the United States vote during the week? Is it simply a historic practice? Or is there a reason? In Germany, every vote takes place on Sunday. Some people still need to work, such as emergency service workers and restaurant or gas station employees, but mail-in voting can accommodate them, or they can vote before or after their shifts. This way, approximately 95% of people can vote easily, instead of making it inconvenient for everyone. No matter which weekday is chosen, some people will have an easier time voting than others, so it is better to make it easy for as many people as possible. Story 32. You have elections on a working day? That is totally crazy. In Germany, they are always on a Sunday. Story 33. Everyone who wants to vote is already voting. Making it a holiday will not change anything. Story 34. You could vote for free instead of having to spend more than $100 on it. Story 35. Nothing. Holidays are a joke in the United States. If it were a required day off, essential workers would still go to work, just like during the pandemic lockdown. Police are essential workers. They would be upset about being required to work, and even more people would be beaten and arrested while trying to vote than currently are. That is the whole reason we need online and mail-in voting to be more accessible to everyone. Story 36. I work in retail and we only close on Christmas. We receive holiday pay, so I am in favor of it. I vote by mail regardless. Story 37. I would be surprised to see more than a few additional voters show up at the polls. Story 38. A few more people would vote, but not very many. Those who care enough to vote already make arrangements to do so, and those who do not care will find something enjoyable to do with their day off rather than take the time to vote. Story 39. Haha. Good one. Then more people would vote. Who would want that? Story 40. Turnout would increase somewhat, which would help one of the major political parties more than the other. Story 41. Great idea. Many hourly employees may not be able to vote without losing pay or risking job loss. Story 42. Why do people keep entertaining this silly idea? Some of you act like everyone can have the day off and everything will just run on its own. In over 25 years of voting since I was 18, I never needed a full day off to do this. Story 43. Abstractly, I am in favor, but I do not think it would change anything. Most of the country has a substantial period of early in-person voting and no excuse voting by mail. Making it easier on one day will not move the needle. People do not care. A depressing number of people proudly refuse to participate while also lamenting the outcomes that their lack of engagement contributed to. Story 44. Having the day off is not preventing people from voting. Apathy is. Story 45. A lot of people here are letting perfect be the enemy of good. It would be a benefit. Would everyone magically have it off, have it equally distributed across industries, pay scale, or provide easy access to a booth? No. Would it still increase the likelihood that more people would vote? Yes. My hope is that it drives further electoral engagement and so on. Story 46. It would ensure that members of the Republican Party would not win another election. Story 47. There are 2 weeks of early voting, including weekends. A national holiday means children are out of school. Hourly workers would still have to go in. This is at the bottom of the list of reasons why people are unable or choose not to vote. Story 48. People have to work on holidays, so it would not benefit them at all. Many others do not care and treat it like any other day off. Story 49. Republicans would never win another national election, and many states like Texas would turn Democratic. This has been studied for decades, and this is the reason you will never see it happen. Republicans will never let it come to pass. People saying nothing would happen do not know what they are talking about. Story 50. Since there are laws to ensure that you have time to vote, I suspect people still would not vote. The focus should be on making voting more accessible and providing better candidates. Also, a federal holiday would have impacts on the economy with businesses closed and companies responsible for holiday pay. Story 51. Everyone who does not vote because they have to work would still have to work. This is another solution proposed by those unaffected by the actual issue. Story 52. I have never voted in person in over 20 years of voting. It amazes me that people take time off work and stand in line to exercise their constitutional right. Story 53. There is no real need to worry. Early voting is available. Polling places open very early and stay open late. Many employers make it easy to vote, but many do not. However, the same people who still have to work every other federal holiday will not benefit because they still have to show up. Story 54. More low-income individuals would gain the right to vote, and the Republican Party would receive an even smaller share of the popular vote. Story 55. 46 states offer early voting. By early, that means weeks up to 55 days. 35 states allow individuals to request an absentee ballot or mail-in ballot for any reason. If someone is not voting, it is because they do not want to vote. It is not because they have to work. Story 56. More members of the Democratic Party would vote, which is why members of the Republican Party oppose it. Story 57. We would all get drunk the night before and sleep through Election Day. Story 58. Probably not much for me since I work in the medical field, but if it increased voter turnout, that would be excellent. Story 59. I'm not sure it would change much. Those who want to vote do. There are plenty of times, days, and ways. I am pretty sure if we made it a holiday, it would just turn into a shopping day. Story 60. People would still work, especially with the increased time and 1.5 times pay. Story 61. Why don't we have voting across multiple days? Start on Thursday and end on Sunday. Story 62. We vote on Tuesdays because Sunday is for church, Monday is for riding into town, and Tuesday is for voting. In the early days, we were very pious. Story 63. It needs to be done across the board. My husband works an hour and a half away. He leaves for work at 5:30 a.m. and gets home around 5 p.m. That means he joins long lines to vote after work. Anyone working in an industry where they cannot take the day off should be given enough time to vote. Story 64. There are plenty of jobs that require people to work on holidays. Desk workers and some blue-collar workers get the day off, but those people generally do not have a problem being allowed to take time out of their shift to go vote, assuming they do not vote using any of the ways you can vote without actually going to a polling place. Story 65. I do not know, but voting by mail early should be much easier in every state. Story 66. Honestly, no member of the Republican Party would ever be elected to high office again because more people would vote. Story 67. Our problem is not that people do not have time to vote or that not enough people vote. Our problem is that every single institution of governance in this country, including our electoral system, has been corrupted by money. Story 68. Nothing. Early voting and voting by mail affect turnout, but making Election Day a holiday would not necessarily improve it. People who do not have time to vote likely would not get the day off. Story 69. Considering we now have extended voting times for the majority of states, and even then that did not bring the masses to the polls, I do not think anything will change if we make the last day to vote a holiday. In some states, that extended period is 2 weeks, including Saturdays. And still. Story 70. In Germany, voting is on a Sunday, when everything is closed except for necessary infrastructure, so many people are off work. You have the whole day to vote, so even if you have to work, you can usually find time to do it. There are usually no long waiting lines. It is a quick process. This may depend on where you live, but there are generally enough voting places so that everyone has easy walking access to their nearest voting location. In my village, we head to the voting place on Sunday together at some point during the day, and it takes about 2 minutes. Cities may vary. There is also the option to vote by mail. You request the documents beforehand and send the completed forms back. Story 71. People would use it as an excuse to get intoxicated and barbecue meats, the same thing they do for every other holiday. Story 72. More people would vote, which makes it harder for the Republican Party to win, so this will never happen. Story 73. Early voting is the way to go. There is, I believe, a whole month in my state that covers both weekdays and weekends. Story 74. What would happen is that conservatives would be at a disadvantage because workers and students are no longer soft disenfranchised. That is why it has not been made into a holiday despite many efforts to try to change that. Story 75. Early voting and voting by mail make this largely unnecessary. I always vote on Halloween afternoon. Story 76. Not to be overly cyclical, but if Election Day becoming a national holiday was advantageous to the conservative agenda, then I think we would have heard of such a policy being championed by right-leaning voices as much as we have heard of other right-leaning voter policies. Just spent a couple of hours today in the Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, Tennessee. Please do not get me started. But we have not. In my recollection, it is primarily suggested by the liberal left, which makes me conclude it has been determined to be to their get-out-the-vote advantage. Story 77. I am an independent, and this works for me. I know many people who work long days and want to vote but cannot. They do not trust the mail-in process. Story 78. Everyone would get intoxicated the night before, then show up to the polls drunk and under the influence, and just like that, intelligent, effective, and worthy people are in office. You can thank me later. Story 79. A lot more drinking. Man, election night drinking games would be dangerous. November 5th to 6th would surpass St. Patrick's Day in alcohol-related emergency room visits. I honestly think they would have to extend hours after Election Day, similar to New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, due to the hangovers. Story 80. White-collar jobs would get the day off. Blue-collar, retail, and service workers would still work, but they would receive time and a half holiday pay. However, they would still not be able to vote because they are scheduled to come in. Story 81. If anything, at my job, the office staff would have the day off and I would still be working in the hospital. Story 82. It would not matter if the people who still had to work could not take time off to vote. Story 83. If they required proof of voting to get the day off, more people would go to the polls. Story 84. Most presidential elections are already held in a leap year. Most states allow you to vote by mail anyway. By law, you are supposed to get time off to vote. Why should one election out of the many we have every few years be a holiday? Should every election be a holiday? Why isn't this an issue for any other nation with voting? People just make excuses or have bad bosses. Story 85. In Greece, voting takes place on Sunday when most businesses are closed and everyone goes to their polling station. Traffic is heavy on that day. Story 86. In India, it is a holiday. Even if it is not a holiday, you can still vote easily, assuming you are a registered voter where you actually live. Voting camps are mostly within walking distance. If you are a registered voter in town A but live in town B, even election day being a holiday is not of any help. Story 87. We need an election week or something similar, not just one day. Story 88. Higher airline ticket prices and hotel rates are expected as people are likely to take short vacations. Story 89. All the retail employees would not be able to vote because retail stores would be running election day sales and expect lots of shopping. Story 90. Absolutely nothing. Just like current holidays, only certain people would actually get it off. People who do not already vote still will not. Story 91. I think it would be more effective to mandate 2 to 3 hours of leave to vote than a holiday. It would free up more workers to vote while having less impact on coverage and services, which might be more tolerable for businesses and consumers as well. Having said that, universal mail-in voting is the most effective systematic change to increase voter participation. Story 92. Does the United States have advanced voting? We have that here in British Columbia, Canada, and it's nice because you can do it ahead to avoid the rush or schedule it around your regular workday. Story 93. Billionaires and corporations would make approximately 0.01% less money and would act as if their hair were on fire. Story 94. On minor holidays like President's Day or Veterans Day, the post office and banks were closed, but I still had to go to the office, just like most people. There are only a few holidays when things truly shut down. It would be difficult to create a new holiday where everyone gets time off because the business and retail industries would oppose it. There are other ways to make voting easier. Story 95. Nothing significant. Our votes scarcely matter anymore. To be honest, I do not think they ever did. The election goes to the highest bidder, and we are stuck with whatever wealthy decaying individual for the next 4 years. Story 96. It needs to be a week-long process, not an 8-hour process. Story 97. Opponents would find people who do not vote on that day and use it as an excuse to have it banned. Story 98. Some commentators claim that it would increase voter fraud, but in all seriousness, I do think we should. Every United States citizen, regardless of what state, county, or city they live in, should have the option to mail in a ballot. They do not need to request it. It will be sent to them. A day off for voting. Mandatory voting. My hope is that the first point helps reduce the burden our current system causes, where the ability to vote is inconsistently accessible. Story 99. More people would be able to vote, and I am pretty sure that is the reason it is not an official holiday. Story 100. I would continue to vote by mail and still likely have to work. Story 101. No need to. Early voting starts about 6 months before Election Day. Story 102. We would turn it into an all-day block party, and voter turnout would go down. Every 4 years, a new Captain America movie would be released that day. Ice cream trucks would only sell the red, white, and blue popsicles. Inexplicably, radio stations would only play Chingy. Story 103. Car dealerships would just take it over with a petting zoo and a barbecue. Story 104. There would be a more accurate vote among working-class people, and it would make the top 1% more fearful. Story 105. We would still elect people who do not care about the working class. Story 106. Give more people the opportunity to vote? Cannot have that. Story 107. Nothing much, really. People would have more time to think about who to vote for, I guess. Story 108. Children would probably still have to go to school since they are too young to vote. I think maybe 18-year-old high school students would get the day off. It would be messy. Story 109. I think that election day should be 2 days, Sunday and Monday. Employers must give employees at least one of those days off. No big deal for the Monday to Friday crowd. They already get Sunday off. For everyone else, employers just have to schedule appropriately. Easy. Story 110. They would take the day off like normal people would. Story 111. It already is. It is a law that your employer cannot stop you from voting, so go vote before work. When you get in, stay or leave early and go. Story 112. Nothing. The groups that need representation the most would still have to work. Story 113. People would have an extra day off, and that is about it. The people who cannot even find 15 minutes to vote early during the weeks leading up to Election Day are not going to suddenly start turning out in large numbers to spend hours in line to cast their vote just because they were given that day off. Story 114. Yes, let's celebrate which out-of-touch retirement age people we're going to elect. Story 115. How about rewarding everyone who votes with a $50 gift card to the supermarket of their choice, with a limit of 1 gift card per person? Offer everyone the option of either mail-in ballots or in-person voting. People who cannot take time off from work could use a mail-in ballot and drop it off at the nearest post office or ballot drop box on the way home. This would create a strong incentive for low-income individuals to vote because $50 can buy a day or two worth of groceries if you know how to shop economically. Story 116. The feudal overlords would not allow a day's loss of production. Only the top executives would get the day off to vote. The rest of us would have to wait until our shift was over. Story 117. Just hold it on a Sunday and have everything closed. There is no need for an actual holiday. Story 118. You would have higher turnout, but not the substantial, overwhelming turnout you would expect. Story 119. It's not? Good God. In my country, it is always a day off, and we have had many elections lately. Whoever works that day has to receive double salary. That is the law. Story 120. I have been advocating for that for ages. In my state, the polls close at 6 p.m. There is no way I can leave work on time and make it to the polls, so I always have to leave work early, which I am sure annoys my boss. More people would vote if it were a paid holiday. Story 121. Slightly more people would vote, but not as many as you might expect since polling locations already tend to have long lines on Election Day, especially in areas that are disadvantaged, which is the biggest detractor from voting on Election Day. Also, most states have early voting weeks before the election and the lines are usually shorter during those times. Story 122. The widespread election fraud would be exposed. I am not a supporter of former President Donald Trump, but this issue goes back at least to the Gore versus Bush election. Story 123. Have they spent 40 years trying to break their own education system? Well then. Story 124. Terrible idea. Penalizes shift workers and critical staff. The right way to do this is to have plenty of polling stations and have them start early and finish late, from 4 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock at night. That way, the nurse coming off the graveyard shift or the tired parent who is not free until 8 o'clock in the evening can still go vote. Story 125. Screw rinse, divide, upbeat, makeshift, market busy, start wakeful engine. Story 126. Where I live in Germany, elections are always held on Sundays, when most people do not work. Mail-in ballots are easy to obtain if you are among the small percentage of people working that day on holiday, or if the election day is inconvenient for you. You do not have to register to vote. Ensure you have not been removed from the registered voter list, or jump through any other unusual hoops. Whenever you move to a new city, you must register your new address within 4 weeks. This registration also serves as automatic voter registration. A few weeks before any election, whether local, state, federal, or European, you will receive a reminder in the mail. The reminder provides the location where you can vote in person and also serves as an application form to request a mail-in ballot. You can apply for mail-in voting online, based on your registered residence, Or visit the local city hall or election office a few weeks before the election to vote in person. You do not need the election reminder form. You can simply arrive at a local polling station with your identification or passport, and you will be on the list of eligible voters. If you move to a new city, register your new address within 4 weeks. The new city will contact the old city to deregister you there, unless you maintain more than one residence. In that case, you must choose one as your primary residence, and that is where you will vote. Story 127. Democrats would perform better electorally. You would see many white-collar employees get the day off and vote, while blue-collar workers, retail, and service industry employees would still need to go to work. Story 128. In many places, bars are closed on election day, so many people stay home and drink instead of going to work. I doubt many more people would vote because voting is already very easy. Story 129. I have mail-in voting in my state. Takes a few seconds to walk to the mailbox, but I will take the whole day off if that is what you are proposing. Story 130. Increased voter turnout. Making the presidential election a national holiday would likely lead to higher voter turnout, as people would not have to juggle work and voting. This could result in a more representative democracy with a broader range of voices being heard. Story 131. Nothing really. The fact is most Americans just do not care. Our best voter turnout was only 62%, less than 2/3 in an election that was highly charged and during an unprecedented time. The people who do not vote because they do not care, not because they have to work. Work legally must give you time off to vote. Even if you do not want to take time off, you can request an absentee ballot for free. Many states have week-long early voting. If someone does not vote, it is because they just do not care to do it. Story 132. Even fewer people would vote. Voting should be mandatory with fines for those who do not. Story 133. Nothing. The United States does not actually have federal government-mandated holidays. Story 134. People would spend their day off harassing others aggressively who are trying to vote and hand out water. Maybe not, but probably. Story 135. If it was a holiday where only gas stations, health workers, and emergency workers were working, everyone would take the day off and do fun activities. Few people would bother going to vote. Elections should have 1 day of in-person voting. No mail-in ballots except for very special cases. Voting needs to be challenging. Otherwise, there should be some kind of test to filter out people who do not care. Story 136. We have an electoral system, so individual votes do not matter as much unless you vote as a bloc. There is not much choice as far as I am concerned. Story 137. Very few people in the United States work a normal work week anymore. Those who do typically vote after work. Story 138. Democrats would win and do the same things the other side does. Story 139. The real question is why it cannot be more than 1 day. For example, if you like Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, that way there are more chances for people to be able to vote. Story 140. The poor would be able to vote and we cannot have that. Story 141. Since voting day is always a Tuesday, people try to get Monday off, so they can have a 4-day weekend from Saturday to Tuesday. This would probably decrease voter turnout. Story 142. Fewer people would vote if that happened. They would use the day as an escape from obligation. When I worked in retail, we got election day off. It was surprising how many people complained about it. Story 143. The sad fact about America is that more people play the Powerball lottery than vote. An easy solution is for one random voter to win $250 million. Story 144. It would not matter. True government employees would get the day off, but look around at other federal holidays and how many people actually get the day off. How many stores are open on Christmas, New Year's Day, Labor Day? See Labor Day sales every year, Memorial Day, etc. The private sector would just ignore it and nothing would change except government employees, state, local, and federal, would be the only ones getting the day off, as well as school children who cannot vote. Story 145. Too many people would still have to work. The effect of a voting holiday is minimal, if any. Story 146. To the political process or voter participation. Nothing. Every state in the United States of America has mail-in and absentee voting. If anything, it would decrease turnout, as people would make plans to enjoy themselves instead of going to their polling place. If you really wanted to improve voter participation, combine your tax return and your ballot into the same document. Story 147. The majority of non-white-collar workers would still be required to work, just as they do during any other holiday. Story 148. Had a job that essentially did this. If you had not voted yet, you were released after completing opening tasks to take the rest of the day off and vote. If you already voted, you were allowed to work at 1.5 times the normal rate for the rest of the day. No one called out because it was not necessary, and people generally cared more about making extra money than actually getting the day off. Story 149. I would be hungover and probably would not make it to the polls. Story 150. The kind of people who have to work on every minor holiday in retail are even more likely to work on major holidays. Many people who work standard 9 to 5 jobs leave town for a 3 or 4-day weekend and either vote early or do not vote. There are probably more parties when a long weekend is created for Halloween. For many people, their work schedule does not change because employers are not required to give employees federal holidays off. Story 151. Because it increases voter turnout, especially among people with less job flexibility, such as working-class individuals, the Republican Party opposes it. Story 152. More people would vote, and certain segments of certain political parties do not want that. Story 153. We would all still go to work. Most years, I work Memorial Day, Independence Day, Labor Day, Thanksgiving Day, and Christmas Day. I am 50 and have not had a vacation in 13 years. I have not used a sick or paid time off day in 2 years. I work on my birthday. I work on my daughter's birthday. I worked on my anniversary when I was still married. A lot of this was because of the Army, but I retired 11 years ago from that situation. Think about it. You have the day off. Would it matter if you could not get gas, could not ride the bus, could not pick up a pack of cigarettes, could not go look at a new car, and so on? No. So of course, many people still have to show up to work. A federal holiday just means it is one less day I can get those unhelpful people at the Veterans Affairs to fit me in for an appointment. Nothing would happen. Nothing does happen. Half of us still work very hard so the other half can relax on holidays. Like every other day. Story 154. Most states have early voting now, so I will confidently say nothing. Story 155. Life in a developing country with a proto-fascist theocracy. Australia votes on a Saturday and has postal voting. It works perfectly. Story 156. It does not need to be a holiday. We need to enact a law that guarantees every voter 3 hours off from work on election days to go vote. Canada does this, and it seems to work quite well. Of course, the political party that benefits from the working class having difficulties voting would never allow such a law to be enacted. Story 157. Holidays do not mean anything to private companies, and private companies employ the majority of Americans. So unless the government wants to dictate some kind of mandatory holiday, which they never will, it will not change much. The service industry in particular is disadvantaged in terms of holidays off. Story 158. Nothing whatsoever. Why, what do you imagine would happen? Story 159. Bars would do much more business the night before elections. Story 160. In Australia, elections are always held on a weekend. Service workers will still be working, but it frees up large numbers of other Monday to Friday workers, for example, teachers. There is also much more accessible postal and absentee voting. Voting is mandatory in Australia, with fines and penalties for not participating. Technically, you do not need to cast a vote. You just need to attend a polling booth to be marked off, or apply for postal or absentee voting. Casting your actual vote is optional. Story 161. Half-baked theory. Fewer people would vote because the only reason some percentage of the voters vote is that their jobs allow them to be absent for a while to do it. With a holiday, that same group would not want to waste part of their day off by voting. Story 162. Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. Story 163. Nothing, most will just see it as a free day off. There will still be people working because the only places that will be closed are state, federal, and some small family-owned businesses. I doubt it will increase the number of voters. I bet it will lower voter turnout because who wants to spend a day off waiting in line when they could be doing more important things? Story 164. Republicans would never win another presidential election. Story 165. If voting were easier, the Republican Party would never win again. Period. Story 166. Or just have mail-in voting like we have here in Oregon and several other states. It is the most secure and convenient way to vote. Going to the polling station is antiquated and unnecessary. Story 167. They do not want low-income individuals to vote, so they force them to make difficult choices. Story 168. Republicans would never win another state or national election. Story 169. The number of young people voting would likely increase significantly, as would the number of working-class people. There is a reason Republicans would never agree to this. Story 170. Does the United States not have a system for early voting? In my country, you can vote weeks in advance at libraries and schools that are kept open at convenient hours by volunteers. Story 171. Very little. People do not vote because there is no significant difference between two poor candidates. They are all bad. When people can see one is much better or one is much worse, they do vote. Voting, even when requiring identification, is already extremely easy. Story 172. Republicans would be upset because more people would vote. Story 173. People would actually be able to vote and the grand old party would lose all power soon after. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.